All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody listening. Welcome back to another week of Bourbon and Bible Stories. I'm one of your hosts, Donte Milligan, the minister, theologian, teacher, and I'm here with.
Amy McMinn, not a theologian, teacher, educator, questioner, traveler, dog enthusiast. I've been cuddling with Dolly all afternoon. It's been very nice.
Yeah.
Nice rainy afternoon.
Right. Oh my God, it was raining so much today.
Yes,
Right.
thank you for giving me the ride back so I didn't have to walk in the rain.
Yeah,
That was
yeah. Thank
much
you for
appreciated.
enduring my awkward phone call.
Yeah. You know what? That's one of those situations like don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like I'm
I'll
I'm just
take the
gonna stay
ride.
out of
Don't need
this
to
one.
know anything more.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, we glad to be back at it again. Another week. How's your week been thus far?
Lots of ups and downs. Lots of ups and downs. It's you had mentioned a couple weeks ago about, like as an administrator getting ready for the next year, and it's
Mhm.
starting to get to that point for everyone, and uh lots of exciting changes
Yeah, yeah.
uh for both of us that I'm
Hmm.
excited about. But it's been, yeah, just a lot. I guess one thing that I wasn't expecting, I don't know if you know this or not, but I did get asked to teach another class.
Oh yeah, I did hear about this. Yeah.
And if I get a little bit of extra change, you know what? I'll suck it up and
Right, right. Can't
do it.
complain
But
about that.
I've been coming to terms with like, oh, you're down 7 hours every 2 weeks, Amy.
Hmm. Yep.
Got it. That's I know what I signed up for, but just gonna buckle in, and we're at that point in the year where it's like, we're finishing the grading period. It's not at spring break yet, but it's like, God, we're all ready.
Right, right.
What
Yeah.
about you? How's your week been?
It's been good. I mean, it's felt like a long week. Like it's crazy to me that it's only Wednesday.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's true.
yeah. But yeah, like you said, we have a lot of planning for the future. It's good. Like I always like when we're in this part of the year and we're like, okay, what do we want to do next year? Like I had a budget meeting today and just talking about like what the budget looks like and what could change for next year and just like having our we're in the hopes and dreams phase where we're just like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that. Now, at some point we got to try to make it all actually come true, and we'll see what what actually happens.
Yeah,
But at least when we're just dreaming about what we could do, it is fun, interesting, and enjoyable.
I
Yeah.
actually had a bit of fun after. I don't know when y'all's budget meeting was. I'm sure there's been multiple ones, but
Hmm.
getting the email of like, we have money, like, let's buy books. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I can
Hmm.
make you a list in 20 minutes of books I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that actually, I did have a really good time the other day going through my new class's curriculum, just being like, oh yes, I need this book, I need this book, I need this,
Hmm.
and if it's there, we'll
Let's
take.
go. Yeah, that's funny that was we were talking about the budget and it was just like, oh, are there like is there some areas where like you should be spending or like where you want to cut down? And I'm like, I don't want to cut down because I think that people just don't know that this money exists.
Oh no, I mean, I I have no idea what goes on with that.
Yeah. So I think that's something we want to do more of. But yeah, all is well, all in all. But we have a really interesting
We've got a
piece to
beast of
jump into
we've got a
today.
beast of a story. I
Yeah.
will. I'm just gonna be straight up with you from the beginning. I did not allocate enough time for myself to fully
Yeah.
dive into. Usually, do reading, or like I'll start like an hour and a half before we jump on.
Mhm.
And I started going through this and was like, I can see what you mean by like, there's no way to go over all of this in 1 hour.
It's gonna take this is gonna be multiple episodes. We're gonna call this Sermon on the Mount part one, assuming that there's gonna be a part two. But yes, we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And as Amy alluded to, it is a long piece, and it's not, you know what, it's not just that it's long, it's that there's so many like key principles and ideas expressed in
Well,
it.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, there were a couple ones where it's like I caught myself like going back and rereading it a couple of times of like, this is interesting,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I don't know a lot of the context. And I mean, this is a story like I have been familiar with this story.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like
I
this
would imagine.
is one of the common ones.
Hmm.
My Episcopal youth group did they did retreats twice a year, and one of the retreats that they did was actually completely based on this,
Oh,
and
nice.
it was kind of cool. Like I mean, we were in the mountains in North Carolina and Boone, um, and there was this giant mountain, and they actually had us all like go on the mountain and like
Nice.
they did part like it's from a lot of this is really well known.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And I would say
I
that
did not realize this was where the Lord's Prayer came from, though.
yeah, yeah, the Lord's Prayer is in here. So yeah, I mean, it's that just goes to show you how um influential this piece is. And one of my favorite things about the Sermon on the Mount, in terms of, and like we've talked a lot over the past episodes about kind of the different sects of Christianity,
Mhm,
and that the dominant sort of pop culture Christianity is more conservative,
mhm,
and like people don't always realize that, excuse me, there's a whole nother strand of
mhm,
Christianity that is more progressive and is more,
mhm,
tolerant, accepting, doesn't take everything so literal, whatever. And so one of the ways you can tell the difference between like, which Christian you have is like what part of the Bible do they take seriously or like literally, and what part do they think is metaphor or whatever, right? So like we talked about like Adam and Eve, and I said like, a lot of that is literature, and it's metaphor, it's symbolism. If you look at like, verses about um that talk about like someone prayed and then they got a bunch of land or something like that. There are like, I have evangelical friends that have whole, movements and studies about like praying this prayer and you're going to get rich, right? Like prosperity gospel kind of stuff.
mhm,
But if you talk to them about the Sermon on the Mount, a lot of times their interpretation is that this is symbolic. This is all like, oh, well, no one could actually do those things. So like it's just an example of like how good Jesus is and like how we need to, strive to be more like him and ask him into our heart. Whereas like myself and people on like the Anabaptist kind of side of things, like the your Mennonites and your Amish and like your more progressive Christians, um, are taking this part literally. Like the turn the other cheek and the nonviolence and everything like that, and like saying, hey, if we should not go to war. And like I've met Quakers who have gone to jail for not paying taxes because they won't let their taxes be used for war making, like, like taking it really seriously
mhm.
and not taking the other part seriously. So this is a good litmus test for who you're dealing with.
Well, it's kind of funny that you say that too, because so like I talked I talk to my mom all the time,
Hmm.
but I told her that this was the story that we were doing this week, and she got so excited.
Yeah.
She goes, "That's my favorite one." Oh, she also wanted me to tell you that I can't remember her exact wording, but she was like, "The Catholics that Dante described in Philly, those are like the Catholics I grew up with."
Oh, nice.
'Cause she did grow I mean, she grew up in the North, or like she born in the North, lived in Lynn,
Hmm.
Massachusetts, and then Schenectady, New
Oh, lost you for a second.
so that
Oh.
was a transition. But she was saying that like she actually thinks that she got her social justice roots
Hmm.
from the nuns.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
No, that
I
makes
thought was
sense.
really interesting, but she wanted me to make sure to tell you that she does listen to every episode, and she was like, the way he's talking about Catholics,
Yeah.
like that's the Catholicism I knew. But she was also telling me that like when her and my dad got back together before they had me, like I guess around the time they got married, they were talking about, like what do you do with the kids and religion
Hmm.
and all that. And this story came up,
Hmm.
and my mom, was saying like she loves this story. And my dad, who was raised, like memorizing verses,
Yeah.
like had no connection to this story.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, like it was I found it to be really bizarre.
Hmm.
But it is interesting that you say that because I guess the way he was raised with it, it was never emphasized.
Yeah. Or it's just like, again, like it's either not emphasized or it's just not used, it's not called upon literally, but like there's a famous Lutheran theologian, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He actually was killed for trying to for being part of a plot to assassinate Hitler. So you see how seriously he took.
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. It's kind of his like magnum opus work. And the whole thing is, or not the whole thing, but much of it is going through, and this is why I said this is multiple episodes. This is like a 300-page book, and it's just about the Sermon on the Mount.
Wow.
But he goes through each one, and like if you look at like kind of his thesis, is he's like what the Ten Commandments was to the Israelites,
Mhm.
the Sermon on the Mount should be to Christians. This should be our, like, if there's nothing else, this is what we follow. And the something just like a little fact that is worth mentioning is this is the longest continuous sermon or discourse that Jesus ever speaks in terms of what's recorded.
Yeah, I
Uh,
will say even when I was looking through it, I remembered your phrase, the red, was it the red letters, red
Red
words.
letter Christians,
I
yeah,
was like, this is just like 5 pages of just red.
just red letters, yeah, yep.
But I will say though, I mean, there's a lot that's obviously awesome, but there's
Hmm.
also some weird shit in here too.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
You
yeah.
know, stabbing out eyeballs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We get there. There's a reason for that. We can get to that.
But so,
But
I feel like all of this is, it's, what you take literally and what you take symbolically.
mhm.
It is all about what fits your narrative. But I do think overall, it's hard to debate with this message. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't like the divorce part either. And
Well,
we can also get to that.
we can get to that because it's more progressive than you think.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah. Well, let's start. You want to start in Matthew 5 and just kind of like
Yeah. I mean,
go
I
through it together?
this is the part that I feel like I've heard the most. And this is really powerful. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, I completely agree. Like, if there is one thing that I know from the Bible, this is probably the part I would pick as well to follow.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is it really it kind of starts off hot with what we call the Beatitudes. And it's the blessed bees or blessed are. And this is, Jesus sort of just saying who he's talking about the kingdom of heaven. And so the background there is that the kingdom of heaven is Jesus's terminology for like God's family or God's like you are opting into this surrogate family of gods. You are saying, and like the word kingdom, like using kingdom was not accidental, right? Like this is a time when there's Roman imperialism, there's some disagreement amongst Jewish people about exactly what they're supposed to do. And so he's saying, like, forget about the kingdoms of this world. we're
Mhm.
we're going to follow the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. So this is immediately a political term. And immediately it's treasonous, right? To say this in Caesar's Rome, that you follow the kingdom of heaven, is to say that you follow another kingdom. It's treasonous for him to say that. And then he goes through and he makes these like really intentional statements about who will be blessed in the kingdom of heaven. And so he is like, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What's interesting is, and let me pull up so there's Luke has a similar, they call Luke's the Sermon on the Plain, because Jesus
I'll be
talks.
honest, I did not even get to the Luke one.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Um, because his is, it just kind of happens in a different order. And like Luke's is a little bit more scattered brained, I guess.
Oh,
But it is interesting to compare the two of them. I just want to pull up that one as well. I'll have them side by side. So it's Luke 6,
Yeah, I think
20
I have it.
to 49.
Yep, got the red.
Yep, there it is. But like, so like if we look at this part, and let me just, I got to get all my versions in the right place. Where's NRSV? Okay. All right. So no, I want 20 to 49, not just 20. Come on. All right, here we go. So just to do some comparison, so Matthew says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Luke says, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." And so Luke's is very intentional about saying, "Bless you who are poor," like materially poor. So who is he talking to? You'd think that you're talking about people that live among the Roman Empire, that are in servitude in many instances, are prone to debtors prison, like all of those kinds of things, second class citizens. And he's saying the kingdom is for you, and which is quite the opposite of what the who the Roman kingdom serves, right? The Roman kingdom serves the elite. It's interesting that Matthew chooses to say poor in spirit, because that could be more than just material wealth. That could be like, you are in poor spirit, or you are sort of downtrodden, neglected in some way, shape, or form. And then he goes on to say, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." So again, you think about people who are depressed in some way. Like, again, he's talking about like outcasted people. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Like people who are who are non-aggressive in
Mhm.
some way. Blessed are those. So again, in Matthew, it's blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And then in Luke, I think it just says, "Blessed are you who are hungry, for you will be filled." So like Luke is very, very intentional about, like, as Luke usually is, about like saying this is about the poor and the hungry, whereas Matthew's is a little bit more all encompassing. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And then blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. That's a big one. When we talk about like the peace churches, so that would be the Quakers, the Mennonites, the Church of the Brethren, like all those folk that are pacifists, like through and through pacifists. A lot of it comes back to here. How are we going to be peacemakers if we are like making war? And yeah,
This
and
this is the part that was actually probably the most quoted at the school I was at in Jerusalem.
mhm,
Like all of the people on the staff, like this was the message that they were pressing,
yeah,
but
yeah.
which also can be kind of problematic sometimes.
hmm Why do you think it can be problematic sometimes?
Well, I mean, okay, I see behind you, you have your book, A Testament of Hope, and I see Dr.
hmm
King on the cover.
Yeah.
So literally, even in my A push class today, uh,
hmm
I was trying to get the kids to
hmm
read, but they had some readings for last night, and I was going over the readings again this morning, and it's Dr. King versus Malcolm X,
hmm
and there are, and I'm thinking about this also in the Palestinian context of,
hmm
it's one thing to tell people, nonviolence is the way, and I think that there's a lot of validity to that argument. Um,
hmm
and one of the points that Dr. King made in this speech that the kids were reading is that it really exposes the immorality of the oppressor,
Right. Right.
and I fully believe that, and I think that that is true. However, when you are experiencing violence to such a great extent, like at what point is it okay, or not, I don't know, okay isn't the right word, but when you
Yeah.
are faced with so much violent oppression, it is reasonable to respond with some violence at some point.
Yeah. I don't think that's wrong. It's funny you pointed at the King book because the one right next to it is Che Guevara. So it's like right next to like
I saw on your board that that's what you were reading.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Granted, if we didn't have all the kids around, I wanted to write a note and just be like, "Commie."
Yeah, yeah. I know someone's thinking that when they walk by. But I think
Oh,
like so
and the kids at the school, like that was always their response to like when they were told this message of like, blessed are the peacemakers. They're like, yeah, but we are facing oppression every day.
mhm.
Like, how
And
are we supposed to respond to this with peace? Like, are we just supposed to sit down and take it? Because if they use the forms of protest that, Dr. King used, which were really powerful and did expose the, moral problems with the oppressed, people aren't necessarily going to see that. It doesn't have the same collective power there. The oppression and the violence is so strong.
right. So I think that this is good. I think there's a few things that get taken out of context a lot with not only with this particular or with like Jesus's overall message, but also with like King and Malcolm and everything. So this is a good like connection. So I was doing something recently where we were just talking about like non-violent resistance as a philosophy versus like never using individual violence. And one of my professors was like, people like don't ever realize that like Martin Luther King Jr. owned guns. Like was a
Yeah.
gun owner, right? And it's like there is a difference between how you organize
Mhm.
to resist in a strategic way to resist an oppressor versus defending your individual love. Like I imagine if you broke into Martin Luther King's house and tried to harm his children, he would have to defend his children in some way that might be seen as violent, in much the same way that there are scenes in the Bible where Jesus goes into the temple and essentially riots because of what they're doing. He throws people out, he hits them with whips, he turns tables over because they're desecrating the house of the Lord. And so I think that peacemakers and I think that peacemakers gets pulled out of context really by, quite frankly, the Christian right.
Which
Oftentimes
for the people who ran my school. So,
right. Yeah, and these are people who will use, for example, when you're at a Black Lives Matter protest, they go, "Oh, we just got to be peaceful." So like,
mhm.
don't like. And I always laughed at this. Like, we'd be doing a protest, and they'll say, "Well, the designated protest area is here, but
Yeah.
if you can't go over here, you can't go in the street. You're not allowed to do that." And it's like, buddy, this is a protest. Like
Mhm.
the point is doing something you're not allowed to do. Like the idea that we're
Yeah.
going to protest in a legal way is it doesn't actually make sense. It's counterintuitive. And so like I do think that in some ways you could even define a lot of civil disobedience as violent. And I don't think that there's a lot of discussion in like university settings about like Martin versus Malcolm and how much closer they were than like I think like our history textbooks want us to believe, because you actually can't really find Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or the Black Panthers, Huey P. Newton, any of these guys ever promoting violence.
Yeah.
They only ever say that we have the right to defend ourselves. But even when like the Black Panthers were rolling around with shotguns following the cops, they weren't shooting cops. What they were doing was standing up and saying, "We're here watching what you're doing." And they were very intentional in how they did that, and they were never going to strike the first blow or anything like that. So in many ways it was also civil disobedience. It just had a rougher tone to it. A lot of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. did were antagonistic and were meant to provoke violence, so that he could expose people on national TV. And so sometimes we get this like vision, like he's holding his hands together, like I'm just not going to hurt or harm anyone because I'm
Mhm.
this good Christian, whereas instead he's being very intentional about how he can use civil disobedience against a power that if he had just, ran up in their place with guns, he dies and they justify killing them, right? And I think you can even see this in like the most recent the current like Palestinian uh um or I guess I should say Hamas Israeli conflict, where the justification for a lot of the violence towards Palestinian civilians is that Hamas committed an act of violence. And now I'm certainly not saying that Hamas could have just like planned a sit-in or something, but I am saying that perhaps when you use violence as your primary tactic to gain freedom, it can taint whatever it is that you're actually trying to do. That doesn't mean that there's never going to come a time when where you're forced back against the wall to fight back. um but yeah, I guess I don't know if that makes sense, like
It does. It does. It
yeah.
does. Now, okay, another case study to challenge to get your perspective.
Hmm.
Well, spoiler alert, I'm teaching some of your middle school kids about this tomorrow.
Oh
Uh,
no.
but Nelson Mandela.
Right.
Okay, so like even I mean, one thing that was interesting at the school I taught at, so like the school had a very strong philosophy of nonviolence.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and it's literally based on that exact verse that we're
Blessed are the peacemakers.
yeah,
Yeah.
like that is the justification that violence is, or like nonviolence is the only response. And granted, you are right. It was, the guy who ran the school who had the philosophy is definitely from the Christian right, and I do think was taking bits of it out of context. But the kids were ingrained of like this is the only thing. Uh,
Hmm.
so like in these classes that I taught, which were often about like nonviolent resistance and about peace and conflict studies,
Hmm.
South Africa was always a case study,
Yeah.
but the director of the school never wanted me to focus on Nelson Mandela. It's always focusing on these other folks. It's focusing on Desmond Tutu. It's
Right.
focusing
Right.
on and obviously I love Desmond Tutu as well. I think he has inspired some of our students to be a little bit nicer. Uh,
Yeah.
Literally just out of the four I teach with this class. But Nelson Mandela, I think, is a great case in point. And this, like, we've been reading some selections from Long Walk to Freedom about specifically this of when he has the moment from like his whole philosophy was nonviolence for a
Hmm.
very long time
Yeah.
until there did reach a point after I think it was the Sharpeville massacre, where they had used every form of nonviolent resistance that they possibly could. And
Hmm.
it got to the point where, as an organization, they decided violence is the only response now.
Yeah.
And it almost cost him his life, not in the violence, but in the court of law.
Hmm.
Um, and he still, even after he got out of prison, had a nonviolent philosophy. But even Nelson Mandela got to this point of violence is the answer now.
Hmm. Well, I think, and I don't know this. I think I've always also no, I should not say I've always. I think I've also come to understand nonviolence philosophy, a nonviolent philosophy as really specific to state violence. Um, so like it's non-militaristic, it's non-military industrial complex, it's non it's non-police violence, it's non-death penalty, like it's those kinds of the empire, if you will, or the state exercising violence against its citizens, and usually against its more vulnerable citizens. But like, and that's kind of why I pointed at like Che Guevara, where it's just like this is the oppressed rising up for freedom,
Mhm.
right? And like I do agree that there are going to be times when the oppressed have to take their freedom, right? We've seen like pick an independence movement, pick a Latin American independence movement, and like
This was literally in the Malcolm X reading that I had the kids read for today. He goes
mhm,
through and he talks about the American Revolution, the French
right, right,
Revolution.
right,
Uh, he talks about the Russian Revolution. He talks about revolutions throughout Africa.
yeah,
Like it's but and I think it's interesting, even well, and we don't need to go back to those two, but like they're even just their definitions of oppression
hmm, hmm,
are different. kind of lost my train of thought there. I feel like I was going somewhere else and then got sidetracked. Oh, but
Yeah.
we're talking about revolutions and
Yeah.
the role of violence in revolutions.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, I like what you said though. You know, it is necessary for people to take their freedom sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know that that's out of that's like if we're challenging this, if I'm challenging myself as a Christian who is trying to live by the words of Jesus, I think and I'll be honest, it's still something I um uh continue to like negotiate with and try to figure out exactly what does it mean for me to be nonviolent. Even like having the conversation with my wife about like, should we have a firearm, should we have a gun in
Mhm,
our home. We have kids, we have property. Like, is it a wise decision? And I've had to, on top, like obviously that decision is a big decision. I mean, at
mhm,
least in New Jersey, it is. In some
yeah,
places, it's like, why wouldn't you have but and I think like, you go through a lot of layers where you're like, okay, well, one, like what are the precautions for the kids? What would I do to make sure that like I'm well trained? Like you kind of go through all of these things, but then I've had these like discussions where I've talked about like, so as someone who says they're following Jesus, how do I respond? Let's say someone does break into my house, what is the proper then response, right? And so obviously you want to thwart harm on anyone else, but like
mhm,
technically, right? And we'll get to it as we continue to read here. I'm supposed to love my enemies, right? So I should also be trying to minimize harm to that person, right? So I've even looked into like non-lethal self-defense
mhm.
like weapons or whatever. Like they have guns that shoot, what are essentially like paintballs full of military grade tear gas. So
Yeah,
like you shoot someone, it hits them with like the impact of a bullet, and then tear gas bursts in their face.
yeah, yeah. Do you know who else uses that? The IDF.
Well, don't make that comparison. Now I don't want to use it. I'm talking about it as a humane thing, and like you just gave the least humane example possible.
That's the first thing that came to my mind. But Dante, that's how they justify the use of that force.
But again, right, state violence
Yeah.
versus home protection. Like I'm saying,
Fair. Okay.
a
Fair. Fair.
dude, right?
Fair.
I'm saying like a dude that's like trying to break into my house to get money for drugs. I would like to not have to kill him. I
Yeah.
would like for him to live to see another day without harming my children. And so, like, while like tear gas is a terrible thing, I know he is much less likely to die.
Mm-hmm.
He would just be really fucked up until they come and get him, and hopefully we can get him help. Right? Like that's kind of the idea. Like I would like to minimize harm. When the state is using it, they're not minimizing harm because you don't need to tear gas peaceful protesters in the first place, and you should probably try to figure out what it is that they're doing or why it is that they're protesting. So I think I do think, but I think this is a great example of like why it can be so situational. I mentioned like the Quakers that I met that don't pay taxes. Like I still pay my taxes. Like there's that question. Like where where do we land on this? Like what does it mean to be a pacifist to one extent or another? Does it mean not protecting your home? Does it mean not paying your taxes? Like, does it mean that if they institute the draft, I go in as a conscientious objector? Like, what, like, where is it? And I do think it's probably different for everybody, like most things are. But that I would encourage everyone to be, especially if you're trying to like follow this, to be intentional about your thought around it. Um, and so I think like using nonviolence as a philosophy, but understanding that like there's the idealism and the realism, and they don't have to be separate. Like the ideal is nonviolence. The reality is that there will probably be points in your life where um, you know, you have to protect yourself or someone else. I mean, and I think that's just the reality of it.
It is an interesting conversation though, and it is. I mean, this is actually a lot of what I try to get at with my students, and part of the reason why I set up my class looking at Nelson Mandela and like explicitly reading his shift and when he had this point.
Mm-hmm.
And then how can we apply these ideas, or like how can these ideas and principles be applied in Israel and Palestine?
Yeah. Right. Right. And if they actually did a similar thing in Lead Onward, I had them
Mhm.
look up a current event that was a conflict, to which I said the biggest conflict going on right now is either Israel, Palestine, or Congo. So you should probably pick one of those two. And then but then ask them, because we're talking about Gandhi, and I asked them to like talk about whether nonviolence could work in these situations, because it is different. This isn't a bus boycott. This isn't a salt march. Like, this is a very, very different
Well,
type of thing.
and nonviolence has been tried in Palestine.
Yeah,
That's one of
yeah.
the like, and I'm not saying you are making this argument, but when I hear people say in
Hmm.
general, like, Hamas is, and Hamas is a violent organization. I
Yeah,
would
for
never
sure.
deny, like, Hamas is explicitly a terrorist organization with the intent to destroy Israel.
Yeah,
That's
right,
stated
right.
purpose. Um, but Hamas did not emerge like out of nowhere.
No, just like
You
Al
know,
Qaeda didn't emerge out of nowhere. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, we know
the,
how these things are created.
and like one of actually, I have a student in one of my ninth grade classes right now. Um, they're doing projects on different revolutions, and uh, I'll tell you who it is later. You'll be very happy that this kid this topic, but they're doing the first Intifada, and
Okay, yeah.
uh, I've been going through some of like my resources to share with the kid, and kind of refreshing myself on it. And it is incredible the similarities between the Defiance campaign in South Africa and the first Intifada.
Hmm.
Like, it
Hmm.
is insane the parallels that they are both using the same strategies,
Right.
but the level of violence and oppression is so much worse. And it's hard to say
Hmm.
that like something is worse than apartheid South
Yeah,
Africa,
yeah, yeah.
but the suppression of every part of free life and just the overt violence is
Hmm.
is astounding. But it has suppressed the nonviolent movements. Like, there was momentum, there was progression, but it was immediately stifled,
Hmm.
to the point where people felt like violence was the only option. Which, I mean, and the thing is, like, it actually speaks to part of, I think, the argument for nonviolence is that it does just continue to perpetuate itself.
It begets more
It,
violence.
and then it grows, and now, like, look where the fuck we are.
Right.
30,000, 30,000 civilians
It's
dead
crazy. It's
in
crazy.
less than 6 months. Like,
It's
it's unreal. It is
it's insane.
unfucking real.
Yeah. And it's funny we talk about violence today. I went to pick up my daughter. She goes to daycare in Philly, and the care person texted me and was like, "Hey, just so you know, there was a shooting nearby, and 7 kids were shot. So, like,
Oh,
there's gonna be a lot of traffic." Basically, is the text. And like my like first reaction as just like a born and bred like Philadelphian is like, great, there's gonna be cops everywhere. Like, I'm never gonna be able to get my kid. And like I'm there, like I'm talking to one of the other moms, and it's like, oh my God, like I had to take this road and that road, blah blah blah. And it's like, man, like how desensitized are we that our first reaction wasn't, oh my God, there's 7 shot teenagers, and I think one of them succumbed to injuries
oh.
recently. I'm trying to keep up with it. But what was crazy about it is I got to the house and we're watching the news, and they're talking about how last night 4 kids were shot in South Philly, and then on Monday like 3 or 4 kids were shot in like another part of North Philly in the Ogats. And it was just like, this is becoming so regular. And even for me growing up, like I was just like, yeah, I mean that checks. Like like, yeah, that like that kind of stuff happens. And it is, it's, I'm not going to say we're living the most violent time, because historically that's not accurate, but just the sheer amount of violence that we're constantly subjected to is, it's a social sin, I would call it. Like, it is a communal sin that I think we are all guilty of, because we all have a an ability to do something to stop it. So even if you're just walking around doing nothing, like when people talk about sin, like people love to talk about like individual sins. They want to know if you're like smoking, drinking, and having sex. And I'm like, whatever with that. What are we doing to like heal society of like just abject violence that is just seems to be everywhere, like just in our backyards, and there's nothing we seem to want to do about it. It's crazy.
Man, man, oh man.
I got a question on this
Okay.
topic.
Okay.
So January 6th, what was that, 2021? No,
Yeah.
yeah, 2021. Okay.
Yeah.
We have the January 6th insurrection that I'm sure everyone knows about. So here's a question, and I've asked this to my classes before. Were the insurrectionists wrong? I'm gonna leave it that vague and that
That's where
simple.
you leave it.
Yes, that vague and that simple. Were they wrong?
Well, okay, can I tell you the story for when like where I was when January 6th happened? Add a little bit more context, and I'm thinking about this context as I'm thinking about how
Mhm.
to answer your question too. So I was in Guatemala at the time,
Oh wow.
and we were still doing online teaching, so I had only taught from my apartment for, we're going on like almost a year at that point.
Hmm.
Um, we went online in March the year before, so I was into online teaching, had my whole thing going, and this group of kids that I was teaching, I only knew them through the computer, but we were all hanging out in our house, um, and there were a bunch of nerds, loved them, um, and they were super curious about the election. And so, like, I was like one of the only Americans on staff, and the election was happening, Trump versus Biden. And I did a lot of just like, get to know, or like, if you want to understand the American political system, like, I'll give you an
Hmm.
hour talk to explain, like, what the hell
Yeah.
is happening here. Um, and when, so like, I was already watching C-SPAN live before we knew this crazy train was happening.
Hmm.
And I had told the kids, I was like, if anyone's interested in, watching it together, like, I'm not doing it, like, this is what I'm doing this afternoon. Um, and I had no idea it was gonna get crazy. And then this one kid hopped on, and one of the most brilliant kids, but he's very far right wing, also Christian as shit. Um,
Hmm.
and he's just like, Miss McMahon, I think something's gonna happen. And I was just like, what, Lucas? Um, I don't think it matters if I say his name. He's 18 and he wouldn't care, and he wouldn't listen to this anyways.
Yeah.
It's I will always remember you this day. But he was like, I'm on Twitter, Miss McMahon. And no, they call me Miss Amy there, but he's like, I'm on Twitter and I see, like, I think something's gonna happen. I think they're gonna break in. And I was just like, no, like,
Yeah, right. Like no, no way.
like
Like
I was
that's never gonna happen.
well, and literally the year before, so like right before COVID hit, I took a group of Guatemalan kids to DC for an MUN conference, and we did a tour of the Capitol. And
Hmm.
so, like we went through my congressman from North Carolina, and like did the
Hmm.
whole tour. Um, and so this other girl was on the call, and I was like, "You remember how like intense the security was? Like they wouldn't even let me bring my water bottle.
Yep. Yep.
They took Angelo's like freaking like Reese cups, or like his candy bars or snacks or granola.
Hmm.
Like it's really intense, like hyper security. I was like, Lucas, you're crazy. Like, no, nothing's gonna happen. He's like, no, I'm on Twitter. It's bad.
Hmm.
And so we are watching it, and I had a house cleaner at the time. Um, and I turned, like, I had it on the TV, and like I see what's happening,
Hmm.
and uh, and my house cleaner said to me in Spanish, or she was just like, "Oh, it looks like Guatemala," because literally like 4 months before that, the uh the legislative building in Guatemala
Hmm.
was stormed in a similar manner, and they just set it on fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that doesn't make the news anywhere else, but it
Nope.
was, but it was also just another day in Guatemala. Like,
Right. Right.
Congress was set on fire.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Um, moving on.
Hmm.
But I mean, but this is, when I think about that context, like, do I ask if those people were wrong? Absolutely not.
Right. Right.
Because well, I mean, granted, Guatemala is a different place. It's a different country. The levels of corruption are way worse there than they are here. Um, and I'm still kind of avoiding your original question
I see where
as
you're going though.
as yeah. I mean, the thing is, it comes down to a lot of. I mean, I hate to say, well, okay, well, politics. Here we.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
will say I have actively been. I mean, God, so many thoughts going through my head right now because when Trump was president last time,
hmm
I was moving abroad. I was living abroad for most of that time. Um,
yeah,
and it was really difficult for me. It was like I can either engage with what is going on in the rest of the world,
hmm
or I can
hmm
engage with what Trump is doing. And like I can't handle both though. I couldn't handle both. So I disengaged from a lot of it. And I study political science. I love political science. I it's something we all should know and understand better. But it's so hard to engage with the reality that like this is happening again.
yeah,
Uh,
hmm
and I have been disassociating. But it becomes more real every day. Like Nikki Haley dropped out today.
yeah.
Do
I know.
I like her? Absolutely not. But she was like a little bit of hope
She
that
was the she was the hope that maybe we wouldn't get Trump.
but the other side of Trump though, and I am by no and I debates among teachers about discussing political beliefs.
hmm
Fuck Trump. I don't even
Right,
care. Like
right, yeah.
this isn't a Democratic Republican thing. This is a
No,
human
it's not. Yeah,
thing. And this is a like if I have students who like he is actively not is anymore, but like when he was in power, he actively went against the rights of so many people and
hmm
children that I love and care about. And I have no problem speaking out and say I do not support that.
right.
Um at the same time, so I mean that's all the preface of like I'm not condoning him, but the the people that follow him also have real concerns and they're also
Oh yeah,
you know
yeah.
and do I agree with them? No. Do I think a lot of them are uneducated? Yes. Is that their fault? Not
No,
necessarily.
yeah,
Like I mean I talk all the time about I'm from freaking Appalachia. you
yeah.
know it's it's a different kind of systematic oppression.
But
uh,
it's there.
and it's real, and
Hmm
what they perceive as injustices against them, we can say if they're like if we think they're valid or not, but it is real for them.
Yeah.
And you know I mean I think even a lot of these people that have been arrested since then, um still stand by what they did. uh
Yeah.
and I think for me what it really comes down to now, talking it through, I what the reason I would say they are wrong is that I think that a lot of those people are also wanting to uphold those values that I was saying before that I don't fucking tolerate. Like
hmm
where like they are also wanting to like yes, a lot of their concerns are valid. Yes, they have been marginalized in different ways themselves, even if they are white men. Like that
Yeah,
can be
they have, yep.
um but I think a lot of them also want to bring themselves up by taking other people down.
Right.
And
And
so I don't agree with those values. And
hmm
they did what they did in the name of those values, then fuck them.
hmm
But one of the things I've talked to the kids about in one of my classes about civil disobedience. And
hmm
because I think ultimately the point you're making here is that like, can the January 6th attacks be interpreted as a form of civil
civil
disobedience?
disobedience. Yeah.
And I think it can be interpreted as that.
hmm
One of the things that I point out to the kids, because we've had students at our school, have kind of like dumb protests or like, oh,
Yeah.
do this, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
wear my uniform.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like no organization,
Yeah, and like
no
and pretend that it's like for a cause.
no purpose. You
Um,
just wanted to wear jeans. It's not for denim
yeah,
day. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
right. But like what I used that specific example with my class when I was talking through with them, though, what is the cause that you care?
Mm-hmm.
How do, like, what is the injustice here? Like, what is the injustice that you are so upset about?
Mm-hmm.
And especially if this is, state sanctioned violence, that is a form of injustice in the form of a law, then
Mm-hmm.
breaking that law is a form of civil disobedience.
Yeah.
But one of the key parts of civil disobedience is also taking your punishment with pride.
Yes. Yes. Not
You know,
crying about it.
yeah. So like, I mean, when we had this denim day fiasco, like, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's like the kids, some of the kids had told me before, like they were going to do it. And I was like, well, you know what? Like, if this is something you really care about, I hope it's something you care
Go
enough about
for it.
to get your punishment for.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I phrased it like that, they don't want anything on their record. It's like, yeah, so you don't really care about it
And you
that.
don't, right. It's not about the cause then. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think that that's kind of the lens I would try to think about with January 6th to your question of like, what were the values behind what they were doing? Like, so the injustice for them was also based on a lie. Like, that's
Right.
the thing, like, the injustice that they were supposedly fighting was Donald Trump losing the election,
Mm-hmm.
which we know did not happen,
Mm-hmm.
but they believed it happened. And is
Right.
it fault that they believed that happened? No, they were fed lies by the man who benefited off of this. I mean, talk about like societal illnesses of just like, believing anything you hear and not questioning it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if we're thinking about like the values behind what they did, yeah, it was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think I always framed it as I would say like it was the right thing for the wrong reason. So like
Mhm.
if you genuinely believe if at any point our government is installing a leader that
Mhm.
is not rightfully there and they are on the precipice of like installing certain values that will oppress our people or certain groups of people, we
Mhm.
should all absolutely be ready to storm
Yeah.
the goddamn Capitol. It's just that that really wasn't what was happening this
Yeah.
time. Like, so it was like, and it was, but it's a funny thing because like people will, and it's like goes back to this nonviolence conversation where people will be like, oh, I'm against violence at all costs, and it's like, so you think the American Revolution was wrong? They're like, well, no, 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 that's different because it's like, well, no, then you're not against violence at all costs. You're just using that as a tactic to suppress the people that you disagree with. So when Black Lives Matter does it, it's wrong. When January 6th does it, it's right. Or vice versa, right? People
Yeah.
have made the same argument, vice versa. And I think we have to get to a place where we decide, like, you know what? Like protesting, resisting, and sometimes, in a more volatile way, uprooting or revolting against or rioting against an oppressive force is the right thing to do. We just have to be sure that that force is genuinely oppressive and that our cause is righteous. And that's the harder thing. But I found myself in a lot, and because of a lot of the things you said too, like a lot of these people are lower class people, and as well as I do. Um, I think a major missed step in a lot of the more recent DEI, equity inclusion movements has been poor white folks and poor white men,
Mhm.
specifically. I think that we've kind of played into the hand of the oppressor by separating ourselves when we have and not raising class consciousness, basically, like
Yep.
not understanding that as a class we have more in common than we don't. But we can divide ourselves among race and gender and all these other things, and we turn into these small little factions. When if we just divided ourselves by the haves and have nots, oh, there's so many more of us than there are of them. And we could be so much more united.
I will say my mom is probably going to be clapping when she hears you saying this.
Yeah.
But this is literally like what she. I mean, I feel like this is what I was raised on too.
Hmm.
But this is the thing: is who benefits from the divisions?
Yeah.
People
The
in power.
yeah, the people in
You know,
power and the billionaire class. Yeah.
keep the status quo the same.
Yep. Yep. They just got to keep us fighting. That's all.
Well, we got a whole 10 lines into this.
Yeah, yeah. I told you we weren't gonna get this in one episode. Um, well, before we let's flip over to Luke real quick. I know we're a decent amount of time into this, so I don't want to like start a whole new thing. But we, I'm just gonna go like three more lines into Luke
Okay.
because I think it's really interesting how Luke lays it out.
Okay.
So, like I said, Luke starts with "Blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will be laughed. Or sorry, for you will laugh." And that is like his version of the Beatitudes.
Mhm.
Then he says, "Blessed are people who hate you when they exclude you, revile you, defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice on that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is what their ancestors did to the prophets." So all that kind of checks. But then Luke does something interesting, and Luke adds woes, right? The woes aren't in Matthew, but they're in Luke. So Luke says, "Woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. And woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestors did to the false prophets." And so
This is
Luke,
a little vindictive.
yeah, yeah, Luke really flips it on top of its head. Like it's not just blessed are the poor, it's also woe are the rich. And I saw, and I think I put it up on our Instagram. There was like a really funny uh um like TikTok or whatever where they were clearly talking about people who were like prosperity, kind of like
Oh, I did see this that you, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's like okay, so um like you think that everything is about God wants you to be rich, even though, and it's just like verse after verse about like Jesus or like, well, God reviling the rich. But again, this is that part where I talk about like you can tell what kind of Christian you're dealing with by what parts they take literally. Like a
Mhm.
lot of like evangelical Christians want nothing to do with this part right here. Like they're like, nope, like totally
Let's say I feel like it could be
symbolic.
the exact opposite way of like, if I am able to become rich, that means like God has blessed me.
Right. Yep. Yep. It's exactly that's how they think. And so this really flies in the face of that. But the idea behind it really, like if you kind of read it for what it is and kind of dig deep into it, it's like if you are, and you have to look at the, again, it's important to look at the time period that you're in, right? You're talking about a time when like people weren't getting rich off of like doing, I mean, I don't know how many people genuinely ever get rich off of doing something good. I think a
Yeah.
lot of times you got to do bad shit to get rich,
I
but like
fundamentally believe that you don't become a billionaire with good morals.
right, right, exactly. And so like that's kind of the idea is it's like if you are rich and healthy and and laughing and all of these things, like they're talking about people who have excess. And there is this, and Jesus does this multiple times in this, so we'll see this kind of idea come up again where Jesus will say like you have your reward now. Right? This idea that you have sought your reward in earthly things, in material things. Again, going back to our Quaker friends and our Mennonite friends, those people, one of the things they value is simple living, simple dress, non-materialism, right? Again, a lot of that comes from this. If your, if your concern is your clothing and your cars and like luxury items and like all of these things, then you have taken more than your fair share. You have basked in excess, and essentially you are seeking your reward here.
Mhm.
Whereas what Jesus sort of alludes to is like, if you share your excess, if you
Mhm.
make it so that everyone has enough and no one has too much, that is when you get your reward, in heaven, whatever that means, right? Whether that's a literal afterlife or whatever. But the idea is that living for the kingdom of heaven is living in a way where you're not hoarding all of the wealth and resources so that no one else has it. But you are instead okay with living simply so that everyone else can have it. So I do like that Luke adds the like woe, and it's not woe to the rich in spirit. It's not woe to the rich who do this. There's no qualifier. It's just woe to the rich.
Mhm.
Like it's
I
straight
like
up.
that a lot. I do
Yeah.
like that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's dope.
All right. Well, should we call it a night,
Yeah, I
Dante?
was gonna say, yeah, this might be a good place to end because I think where it ends up going next is like the love your enemies stuff. Um, which is that's a whole nother piece in and of itself. So I think we'll do next time, and I'm trying to excuse me for trying to get back to where I was.
You're
Why
good.
can't why won't this thing? Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. So yeah, when we come back, we can get into I'm trying to look at what's next. Okay, like the salt of the earth, light of the world. Um, yeah, so what kind of comes next is a little bit about Jesus talking about the kind of the purpose of what he's doing and how he's flipping some of the old commandments on their heads. And then there's some really interesting statements that he makes where he intentionally uses Old Testament laws and
Mhm.
then says like, but now you should view it in this way. And we can talk more about that. But yeah, so again, Sermon on the Mount. If Jesus had a magnum opus work, it would be the Sermon on the Mount. This would be his number one album. So yeah, this may be a few episodes, but please like continue to tune in. I think that this is going to continue to be interesting to dissect through. And like I said, I think this is really the crux of the Jesus ministry. And so if there's ever any piece that someone would want to read to understand like who Jesus is and what he would ask of us, this is it. So, I expect to take some time with this.
Yeah, I mean it's there's clearly a lot to dig through. And I think this was actually I very much enjoyed this conversation as always, but it's especially nice to be tying in like stuff I'm actually talking about in the classroom to like,
Yeah.
connecting it to this.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so we'll pick up next week and everyone else listening, listening, watching, share, like, comment, let us know your thoughts. Um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Have a good week.
absolutely. But bourbon underscore Bible underscore stories on Instagram and Bourbon Bible Stories on YouTube. And then Bourbon and Bible Stories on Facebook. But come check us out. Uh it's been nice. A lot of people are listening, I'm noticing. Not as many people are watching. So that's all fine with me as long
Even
as
though I have
people are
my nice new backdrop.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's gonna change it all now.
Yeah, go double the viewers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like Julian and his friends.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, looking
All
forward
right.
to seeing you guys next week.
All right. Buenas noches, amigos.
See ya.